Welcome back, my name's Steve and thank you for joining me today on my photography journey. What I want to talk about today is a continuation of last time. So last time we unboxed our Z5. We found all the different pieces for it, we put them all together, we went and took our first picture, and now we've done that, we've taken a picture, but there's a few things that we want to change about the camera to make it easier for us. So today, I want to go into the menus, I want to have a look at what's going on in there and tweak a few little things to make it work a little bit better for us. So what I'm going to do is show you exactly what I do in the menus to set up my camera the first day that I've bought it. So I'm not going to go into big detail on everything in there. You can have a look back where I've done that in the past. But today I'm just going to set up some of the basics so that we've got a user mode that has things that we want to use on a regular basis. So let's have a look at that now. The first thing that we need to do is set the language. So when you first turn it on, that's what it takes us to. So into language and then into English for me. So obviously I'm going to go through this in English, but there's various different options which will change what the menus say. Then we're going to come back out and look at some of the other menus that we've got. So I'm going to go up to the top and have a look at the photo shooting menu. So you can rename the storage folder that you're going to use. You just come into this menu here, choose whatever name you want. So obviously I'm going to choose Stephen Martin Photography. Doesn't fit, so I'm going to go for SMP instead. And then a couple of underscores to kind of finish out those gaps there. There we go. So, okay. And now we come back out from here and back to our main menu. And then we can do the same sort of thing for other things. So we could always change our file naming as well. But what I want to do is change the role played by the card in slot 2. So at the moment it's overflow storage. So it will store all things on one card and then it will move onto the other card when that one's full up. But I don't want that. I want this to be a backup so that it saves exactly the same thing on both cards at the same time. So that if there's ever a problem with one of the cards, it gets corrupted, lost, anything like that, and we've still got a copy of the images that we've taken. Coming back to the main menu, we've got our choose image area, and I want to make the full use of the sensor. So I want FX in here. FX is full frame, DX is a APS-C crop in Nikon language. And then we can have a look at the image quality that we want. And we could either have a JPEG or a different quality JPEGs, a JPEG and a RAW, something like that. But I want just a RAW file saved to both cards. And then you've got the amount of compression that you use. So you can have it either lossless or lossy compressed, I guess. And then the bit depth. So the higher the bit depth, the more data is in that file, the more that you can do with it when you're editing afterwards. So compression, lossless compression on, and a 14-bit depth for my RAW files. Next up, we've got our ISO sensitivity. So I always turn auto off at this point so that I have a little bit more control over it myself, and then I can adjust things as I want to. So let's do that. And then white balance. I tend to set a particular number for this. So I'm going to set it to 5600. And in Kelvin, that's about daylight. So then go into here, change those settings there, and then OK. And then that way I've got the same starting point every time that I take a picture. I know that that white balance is set like that. So when I come to edit them afterwards, it's a lot easier to do. Now, picture control, that's something that will only affect JPEGs. So if you're wanting to shoot in JPEGs, then that menu might be for you. And it just adjusts the colors to the final JPEG that comes out, but doesn't have any effect on RAW files at all. And then we've got color space, and Adobe RGB is a slightly bigger color space than sRGB. So I'm going to select that, and then that way I have more colors. I've got the bigger bit depth, so there's more options there. I wonder whether the color space actually only affects the JPEGs, but again, I would turn it to Adobe just in case. And then that is my main settings in the photo shooting menu. Let's just see what else there is. Metering. So metering is how the camera itself looks at the brightness, the exposure for that meter on the side. So with metering, I tend to go for center weighted metering because what I'm taking a picture of is generally in the center. So it kind of prefers that area and makes sure that the exposure is right for that when it's adjusting your meter on the side. Flash, I don't tend to use, so I'm just going to skip past those. But focus mode. Okay, so focus mode is whether it's continuous or single autofocus. So let's set this one up for single focus at the moment. And that way you find one thing to focus on, press and hold the shutter button or the AF on button. It will focus on that, and then you can take a picture. So obviously the area that it uses to focus, that is your AF area mode. So we want a relatively small one, so something like single point AF, and then you've got more control about where it is in the frame and what you actually focus on. Auto bracketing is something that I set up ready so that when I come to use it, it's almost ready to use. I certainly don't use it all the time, but I use it for just auto exposure rather than auto exposure and flash. So I tend to set that up so that it's ready when I do need it. And then you've got silent mode, which can either be on or off depending on whether you want to hear your shutter noises or not. So let's see what else we've got. So let's go into the custom setting menu next. And then this is kind of where you can adjust the details of your autofocus. So in here, you've got kind of the priority selection. So how you prioritize when it will actually take a picture when you're in different autofocus modes. I tend to prioritize the shutter button being pressed when it's in continuous mode so that even if it's not quite in focus, the camera will still take the picture. Whereas in AFS, when it's single autofocus and I've chosen something specific to focus on, then I will prioritize it actually being in focus and getting a better chance of having the picture that I want in focus rather than taking lots of pictures and hoping for the best. And in my mind, that makes sense because the one that's continuous, you'll be moving, your camera will be moving. Sometimes the subject will be in the frame, sometimes it won't. Whereas when you are taking a picture of a fixed thing, there tends to be less movement, so you want it to actually be in focus when you do take that picture. And then if we scroll down to the controls menu, and this is where we can set up the different custom function buttons that we've got on the camera. So for example, F1 and F2 on the front. Basically, you can set these to pretty much anything that you want them to be. So let's go into the menu and let's see what our options are. So for function button 1, I tend to set it to my delay mode so that when I press and hold it, I can then see delay off, 0.2 of a second, 0.5 of a second, so on. So that when I'm taking a long exposure or something like that, pressing the shutter button won't introduce shake into the camera and then ruin the image. So that's not something I use a lot, but being able to use one hand to change it, pressing and holding the button, turning the dial to get the number I want makes a big difference. Then the other thing that I change a lot is autofocus. So that's what I put to function button 2. So again, pressing and holding that, I can use one dial to turn it from manual to AFS to AFC, and the other dial to turn the area mode to what I want it to be for that particular shot as well. So those are the buttons that I tend to change first of all, but let's check a couple of other ones that I find quite useful. So one is making sure that the AF on button on the back is actually doing the AF on job, so that when you press and hold it, it's focusing. Same as if you were half pressing the shutter button, you've got a different way to press and get whatever you want in focus. So it's quite useful. I like that quite a lot. And then the other thing is the ring on the lens. I would generally put it to aperture. So I could change the aperture of the lens with just a twist of that. But for some lenses, it's a bit loose. So I actually turn it off completely for those. So it kind of depends on the lens, and I can come in and change that fairly easily if I want to, because what I don't want is a small knock changing my aperture and ruining my picture basically. The movie recording button, when I'm in photo mode, that doesn't really do anything, so I put it to either displaying a grid on my screen or taking everything away so that I've got a better view of what's going on. So let's set that to the grid for now so we can see that. And then that's probably it, to be honest. It's one of those things that as you go out, you take more pictures, you realize what controls that you actually want, what controls you actually need, how to set things up in the menu. So what we can also do is set up the eye menu so that we've got some of these controls a bit closer, so we don't have to go diving into the menus. So let's have a quick look at that one now. So first up, I've got my metering, so I can change between matrix, spot, center weighted, that kind of thing. Next is the image area, just in case I want to get a bit more of a reach, so I can use a DX crop, which basically zooms in a little bit, but you do lose some quality. Then I've got the auto exposure bracketing, so that's where I can choose how many pictures that I'm bracketing with and that kind of thing. I've got the interval timer shooting, so if I want to shoot a time lapse, then I can do that. The release mode, so whether you're taking a single picture or a burst, that's quite useful sometimes. And then again, I've got the area for the autofocus and the autofocus mode. Those are both in there to make sure that they're easy to reach. Vibration reduction, not something I particularly turn off, but it's there if I want to. And then being able to look at memory card information. So with the memory card information, it's just telling you how it's set up basically. So I'm saving the same thing to both 1 and 2. And I've got 1 and 2 both in the camera. Silent mode, sometimes I want to turn it on, sometimes I want to turn it off, so that's there for nice and easy access. And then image size and white balance, so things that I tend to change a little bit more often are all in that eye menu, so I don't have to go digging through menus in order to do it. You can set these up for different user modes, so that when you change that dial on the top, those options in that menu will change. And the same is true for photo mode and for video mode. So what I would say is the more that you use your camera, the more that you find settings that you like, put them into that eye menu, put them into a user mode, and then you can customize your camera as much as you can and make it as easy to use for you. It doesn't matter what other people do. It doesn't matter what I do. It's setting it up so that you've got the controls that you need where you need them. So like I said, what we can do is save these as a user mode. So if we then go back to our main menu, back to our spanner, which is our setup menu, and then save user settings, you can choose 1, 2, or 3, and then save basically. So I'm going to save this as user 1, so that every time I turn the dial on the top to user 1, those settings are going to preload. I don't need to bother changing things around. So I tend to have one set up for landscapes, one for moving subjects, and a third one for animals maybe. And then that way I can easily switch 1, 2, 3, depending on what I want to take a picture of at that moment. And then the good thing is you can set those up for video as well, so that if I want to do some B-roll, I've got one of those settings. If I want to film something like this, I set it to another one, and I don't have to worry about adjusting those settings each time. I can just kind of tweak it slightly depending on what I actually need. So how do you set yours up? What are the key things that you would do when you first get your camera? Have I missed something? Let me know in the comments, and we'll carry this on next week, and I'm going to look at some basic editing in Apple Photos. Because I know it's a free program, lots of people have it on their computer already, on their phone, their iPad, whatever it is, and I'm just going to talk through some of the new features in there and some of the ways that you can edit things and get the best out of the pictures that you've actually taken. So get subscribed to see that one. But other than that, get out, take pictures, learn what is best for your settings in your camera, and I'll see you again next time on my photography journey. So have a great week. Bye.